All right. Good evening, everybody, and we're welcoming back to another roundtable here tonight. We're going to be discussing part of the Northern Virginia campaign, and then we'll get into Lee and what was going through his mind when he invaded Maryland. How is everyone? Thank y'all for coming on.
I'm all right. Thanks for asking. Busy, but all right.
Great. Glad to have you back, Chris. How many we got on before? We just got three. I thought we had a few more that came on. There we go. All right. Mark's here. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm good, man. Okay, so let's just kind of touch on the end of it there. Northern Virginia campaign. Lee, obviously, McClellan backed away. Could have been because McClellan thought he was outnumbered 3-1 because of bad intelligence. I would hate to think McClellan backed off when they were numerically even. But then a lot of the, what was it, 1 year enlistments or was it 90-day enlistments, Chris, that they originally signed up for on the Confederacy?
Oh, the Confederacy?
Yeah.
The Confederacy had, as I recall, 1 year enlistments, and then they were extended to the duration of the war by the Conscription Act.
Okay. But before, and refresh my memory, did Lee lost a lot of people with the enlistments running out, correct? After 7 days?
Yeah. So, well, what happened was basically by the close of the 7 days, the 1 year enlistments of the Confederates were running out. So Congress introduced the Conscription Act, which would script any Confederate male within serving age who was white and was not in a essential job or didn't own 20 slaves, was reduced to 10 as the months went on. But the problem that Lee had with the act is, as a carrot and stick, it offered Confederate soldiers the opportunity to re-enlist and to choose their branch of service and re-elect officers. And Lee basically said this legislation is so poor that the enemy might have written it for us. Because what it means is you're going to have 90% of your men re-enlisting for the cavalry. The rest will be in the artillery. And you're going to have to re-elect a bunch of officers. So it's going to be a complete disaster. So Lee politicked to change the legislation. But they were looking at a collapse of their military infrastructure in a very similar way that the Army of the Potomac would in 1863. And then more famously in 64.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was basically it. I don't know how many were de-enlisting at this point because the act presupposed the de-enlistment and forcibly extended their contracts. So you might have had desertion, but you wouldn't have a lot of legal de-enlistment because this would have happened in April.
What I'm looking at is I'm wondering if it has to come with the enlistments running out. Is essentially at the 7 days, Lee had some estimates 90, even some as high as 100,000 men, and he lost 20,000 plus. So he's got 70,000 men, but going in and to Antietam, he has less than 40,000. What happened to those other 30,000 men?
I don't want to dominate the conversation. Does someone else want to chime in?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, he was just talking. You guys jump in.
Well, you got Second Manassas for one. That took some of them.
No. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about leading into Second Manassas.
Oh,
what happened?
Sorry, I thought you meant Antietam. I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh yes. I'm sorry. You're right. Yes, you're right. What I meant was from the end of Second Manassas going into and I think he lost. I think he only lost like 7,000 men at second, but I may be wrong. But what I'm saying, where did he lose all these maybe 30,000+ men at between Second Manassas and Antietam?
Oh, I think there were 12,000 lost at during that Second Manassas campaign, somewhere around there. But what's also interesting is number of them wouldn't cross the Potomac this time of year. how many that was.
Did you say a number of his men would not cross the Potomac?
That's correct. I don't know how many, but they didn't sign up. They basically told their officers they hadn't signed up for invading the North. They signed up for defending the South.
Oh,
I would say, just to add to that, I think a bigger issue there. I mean, that is there were some who ideologically did say we're not crossing. And now, of course, there were also a number of them that considered Maryland to be part of the South. Remember that a lot of Confederates believed that Maryland was a Confederate state, and they were liberating it from Union occupation. But another aspect is just the logistics of warfare. These are men who are eating unripened apples and green corn and nothing else. Dysentery is a serious issue. You have massive sick call. You also have pure exhaustion. They've been campaigning and fighting basically nonstop since April of 1862. And Lee has a very bad habit of, frankly, asking his men for Herculean efforts. And I think to an extent, a major issue you have is a lot of them are totally exhausted. There's also the possibility that Lee might have underestimated his numbers. When it comes to Civil War numbers, they're imperfect.
Some of Jackson's men have been fighting since March.
Yeah. Oh,
that's true.
Even longer.
Mm-hmm. So a major facet of this is that what the Confederate Army achieved in that period is frankly extraordinary. And we have to bear some consideration to just frankly physical exhaustion and logistical exhaustion. So I think that would be part of the answer as well. But Civil War numbers are tricky in this way, right? Because they're never accurate to begin with. And then they fluctuate even more. So it's very tricky to say. That would be my guess. I'd be interested to look at the sick rolls, but I haven't, so I can only speculate.
Okay, so what the part I just want to talk about why he invaded this. Obviously, there was wanting to find more supplies, food, and whatever. Was part of his strategy hoping that he would get Marylanders to come over and replenish his ranks?
Oh, yeah.
And give him more men, and then instead this totally backfired against him?
Well, he invaded the wrong part of Maryland for that.
Mm-hmm.
Really? How so?
Western Maryland towards the mountains was very pro-unionist. And if it had been Eastern Maryland and the Eastern Shore in particular, there would have been thousands of Confederate recruits. But where he was heading up to that panhandle part of Maryland, he was heading into some of the most pro-union part of the whole state.
Why did he do that?
Geographically, that was easier because Washington and the fortifications, and Baltimore is heavily fortified. That was really the only route he had.
So was he hoping to like
He was
kill two birds with one stone, threaten DC and gain men?
Three birds. Don't forget foreign recognition. They're still hoping that if they land a knockout blow, England is teetering at this time. Remember?
Yes.
So there's a lot of I think personally there's a whole lot of different considerations. A lot of balls. Lee's juggling a lot of balls in his head at the same time.
Yeah, I want to addendum to that if I can. Because I agree with all that, except while I think the Antietam campaign is definitive in recognition, I don't think that was ever in Lee's calculus, because Lee doesn't seem to ever really believed that intervention was possible, which is ironic because he actually came very close to achieving it, even though he didn't think it was viable. But it absolutely is a factor in the campaign itself. I would just add as a pernicious addendum that, as far as I know, Lee believed that the Confederacy had to win its independence on its own.
Yeah, but Davis did believe in foreign intervention, and the commander would have been breathing down his back on that front.
Absolutely. And regardless of what Lee personally thought, Lee was on the cusp of achieving that is absolutely the case as well.
Pete,
oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Hey, you was trying to say something, Pete. What was you wanting to get in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, talking about again, the reasons up. I mean, obviously, his destination was really Pennsylvania, and for the reasons you guys discussed, but also the fall election, trying to swing it to the Democrats in Congress, and hopefully, they would convince the Lincoln administration to sue for peace. That was one of the possibilities, anyway.
And the Confederacy also had a lot more bargaining power at that time too, with armies in Kentucky and after just coming off second Bull Run. Do you think somewhere in the back of Lee's mind he thought, I'm going to win it now? I mean, we've got them on the ropes. We got armies in Kentucky. We're never going to be this strong again. Let's do it now.
I think there's one other factor I would throw in if we can. I mentioned all the different considerations. In addition to that, I think it was just Lee's nature to be aggressive whenever possible, to go on the offensive whenever he could.
Fair enough.
Whenever practicable.
Certainly could anyway. And, you know, that opportunity lasted until the Gettysburg campaign, but after that, it really didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, he didn't have the chance, yeah.
Sorry, Chris, you want to say something?
Sorry?
You just want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Lee's strategy, as far as I understand it, because it changes, but from 1861 to 63, he believes that if the federal war machine can actually mobilize completely, they can overwhelm the South, which I don't know if they would overwhelm it absolutely, but it certainly is plausible. So yeah, just as Mark was saying, he wants to maintain the initiative because that means he gets to decide where the battles are being fought, what the conditions of the battle are, and what's to be gained by them. So it prevents the Union from operating any of its own plans. But to do this, you have to keep operationally attacking. That doesn't mean you're always offensively attacking on the battlefield, but it means that you're always the one making the first move. And Antietam is part of that. It's preventing the Union from consolidating its armies and counterattacking by invading Maryland. So yeah, I think that's absolutely the case with Lee. And it's I mean, it didn't work, but it was a good plan. It just didn't work.
What was in the Lost Order?
Sorry?
What was in the Lost Order? You know, I don't think I've ever actually read what was in the Lost Order. What was his plan?
That was of Longstreet going up towards Hagerstown, and Jackson, most of his corps going to Harper's Ferry. So it showed that his army was separated by quite a few hours, quite a few months, and you know that's why McClellan moved quickly. But if they wouldn't have blocked him at South Mountain, it might have been a real disaster because Longstreet was still up towards Hagerstown.
The Lost Order, remember, is not a battle plan per se, but it's a dispensation of where everybody is and broadly where they're heading.
It's operational orders.
Yeah, right.
Right. I'm sorry. I should have clarified that.
And operations are always more important than tactics. Tactics happen by accident. Operations happen.
Absolutely.
Right. But again, the whole reason for it, you know, Longstreet going up towards Hagerstown was to lay the path to go into Pennsylvania. Basically, the same plan as a year later, maybe for some different reasons at that point in the war. But I mean, you know, that's what he wanted to do. And
I've actually got a. Oh, sorry. This is funny. I've got a Swell newspaper over there. It's just a local paper, so it's not that rare. But it was published regarding September the 14th, and the author is trying to predict Lee's next movements. And interestingly, it's September 14th, 1862, and in the paper they actually predict one of the possible targets is actually Gettysburg, or one of the places we already might have lost. Yeah, it's quite amusing.
so certainly.
They might go to Gettysburg.
What question? I mean, you know, guys are a lot smarter than me. Lee had 39,000 men at Antietam. Was he waiting on other troops to come up, or is that all he had at his disposal? Or, I mean, what did he plan on doing? Even if he if McClellan wasn't there, how far did he plan to go with 40,000 troops?
Well, remember, first off, he expects Maryland to rally.
I'm sorry, what was that, Chris?
Well, I've been talking too much. I think I was interrupting someone else. I'll wait and then
I'll tell you what, guys. And here's a neat little button right here too. If you'll hit the little bottom button, there's a thing, and there's a hand over there to the left hand part. And if you hit that, yeah, like right there, then I'll let somebody know it's somebody's time to talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think, I don't know how many were in Hill's Corps exactly, or in division, I mean, but I don't know, I don't think they were included in that 40,000 number yet.
Okay.
Can is this the button here? No, I'm not
Just
seeing
tap your screen. If you tap your screen, look down at the left-hand corner, and you'll see like a little thumbs up sign, and you hit that.
Oh, it's on my right side over here. Okay.
Yeah, if you're on
Yeah.
desktop, it's on the right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and it'll show you, so we're not talking over each other. I'm
By the
sorry.
way, Can I go back to one thing just a second?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I think it's worth noting that in the fall of '61, around October and November, Stonewall Jackson presses hard to swing around Baltimore. He wants to go on the offensive before McClellan even launches the Peninsula Campaign. And Stonewall's all revved up to head to Baltimore, and he lobbies Jefferson Davis for it. And so Lee, you remember Lee's still advisor at that point. Joe Johnston doesn't want to hear about it. Joe Johnston thinks he's crazy and he doesn't want to mess with it. But Lee obviously would have read those proposals and been aware of it as Davis's chief advisor. So I think the seeds for going into Maryland had been planted a full year or 10 months in advance in Lee's head. Thank you. That was it.
So,
what was the original question? I know I had something to add, but I think a lot of it's been covered. But what was the original question again?
oh, well, the round table was why Lee went into Maryland, and what I should have reiterated or put more into it. What if he wouldn't have been smart? I mean, I know the Army was ruling but he was down, lost a lot of troops, waiting for the re-enlist. Shouldn't he have just held back and wait for the spring?
I think against a different opponent. I agree with everything that's already been said. I would add that I think Lee had a very cavalier attitude about McClellan, not unjustifiably. Famously, I think it was at that time Colonel Gordon who was asking Lee about the operational plan, and Lee famously responded, "Are you familiar with General McClellan?" Because it is a very risky plan, and against a more aggressive commander like, say, a Grant, or even a pre-Chancellorsville Hooker, that would have been a pretty bad idea. But McClellan is extremely slow. I think what Lee wants to do is he wants to move into Maryland because A, he's expecting a great deal of reinforcement from Marylanders, which wouldn't come to pass. And B, if he can establish a defensive line there, he can begin to rebuild and replenish his army on Maryland soil instead of Virginia soil. It's the same reason he goes in 63. He wants to give Virginia a chance to recover. He could also shift the theater of war from Virginia into Maryland. And yes, he can threaten Washington. And these are all good reasons. He just doesn't have the numbers.
And I would add to that too, Lee, unlike a lot of the Confederate High Command, really got the industrial capability of the North. He knows if they wait all through the winter, the Northern Army is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, more men, more materiel, and it's just going to be tougher when they fight next spring. So he realizes time was not on his side in that regard.
True. Yeah. True. It was going to go continue to go against him. If for some reason McClellan withdraws or Lee wins and he takes care of Maryland, what kind of predicament does that put DC in now? Your capital surrounded by two foreign countries, so to speak.
I think DC is pretty much safe in that context. The DC garrison was exceptionally powerful. Lincoln, until 1864, Lincoln had an army behind some of the most powerful fortifications in the world. There's no way DC could take it.
I understand that, and I'm not saying that they were in danger, but I'm saying, how does that look, towards the rest of the world, so to speak? Your capital is behind, two sovereign enemy nations there. Your capital is isolated.
Well, I would say
communications are cut. Your supply lines to DC's cut.
It would look catastrophic. The supply lines wouldn't be totally cut, not unless Lee controlled all of Maryland, which is easier said than done. And remember that most Marylanders were pro-Union. So Maryland is not likely to find itself as a state of the Confederacy short of total occupation of the state, which is not going to happen overnight. not after.
Well, they
Antietam.
don't have the manpower to do it either.
Exactly. I think, however, as McPherson has argued, I think Antietam could have been the Confederacy's Saratoga. And Mark was getting at this earlier. If Lee had, let's say, by some magic, won the Battle of Antietam decisively, then I think Britain and French intervention would have almost been certain. And if that happens, I mean, coming from a pretty hard Yankee, I think it'd be pretty difficult for the Union to win the war at that point. It would have been a disaster in every respect.
Well, let me ask you this, because say a hardcore Yankee, and you know Lincoln was going to go down swinging. He was not going to stop. Let's say France and England says, okay, we recognize the Confederacy, and Lincoln goes, I don't care. Are they going to put boots on the ground and intervene militarily to force this?
The Britain had already sent 20,000 troops to my country at that point.
Yeah, I knew they had, but you're gonna need more than 20,000. Are they willing to put a 60,000 man army and commit their navy and
Well, the commit. You said the key phrase right there, Chris. Commit their navy. If they could have just broken that blockade, that alone would have changed everything. If the South could have had free commerce with Europe to import what they needed openly,
that
easily.
said, could they block the blockade? And I remember this came up before, and I wish I remember the discussion, because I remember that I learned a lot, and there was a lot I was wrong about. But my question to that would be, could Britain's navy defeat an ironclad blockade? Because while the British have ironclads,
Well, wait,
over to the continent.
wait, just a second. Though. We're talking 1862. It's not an ironclad navy totally. They're still new.
That's true. That's true.
They're coming out. You know,
Jeff
remember,
Johnson,
we're also talking about the most powerful navy in the world at that point.
right? And Jeff Johnson,
We're talking about one of the superpowers.
our naval expert. He told me, he said, up until late 1863, 1864, the British Navy could have still defeated the U.S. Navy.
And
Yeah,
don't
and I think
forget,
that's a good
folks,
point
European intervention sounds far-fetched to us now because we know how the story turned out. But remember, it had happened to their grandparents. We were losing the revolution until France came in and tipped the balance. So this didn't sound so far-fetched to them. It was within the realm of possibility.
And had, let's kind of forget about the Navy here. Had the British used the same plan as, I still call it a tie, even though those Canadians call it a win, but had they used that route of invasion going down the river and setting up a base of operations in, what was it, Montreal? Or you're right there on the Canadian American border. Now he's got a two-front war he's got to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what Lincoln said at the end of the Trent Affair? Let's fight our wars one at a time.
One war at a time. Yes.
One at a time.
I would agree, and I think you make really great points, Mark, about the two Navy. I think fundamentally, if Britain and France intervene in the war, I think that the Confederates win. In the same way that French intervention in the Independence War is what ultimately was able to bring victory to the United States. And what I find interesting is that Lee, I think Lee is a bit overrated, but he's still brilliant. And I find it interesting that he ironically comes so close to achieving that support, but doesn't really ever seem to believe in it. It's just such an oversight for a general who I think actually had a pretty strong grasp of strategic overview. I don't know if there's an answer to that question, but I've always been curious why Lee was so skeptical about something that had happened in history quite recently, comparatively in history for him.
It was his father's generation.
Yeah, exactly.
You think he was skeptical of foreign intervention?
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have ever really believed it was going to happen, which is quite ironic because he almost made it happen. Davis, as Mark mentioned earlier, was up until late in the war. Late in the war, Davis began to lose some faith in it. But up until late in the war, Davis was quite convinced it was very plausible, and it was. But Lee was more interested, and that's the other thing about Maryland that we all forgot to mention. A big part, one of the reasons that Lee invades Maryland is because he wants to upset the elections of 1862 and 63.
See, I never thought about that, the congressional elections in 1862 until y'all brought that up. Sorry for interrupting there.
That's okay. But it plays a huge role. He wants to cripple the Lincoln administration ability to actually maintain a war front. The British, interestingly, misunderstood this, and they thought that if the Democrats won in the 62 congressional elections, Lincoln would no longer be president because they confused the parliamentarian system with the congressional system. But regardless, if Lincoln lost control of Congress, his ability to draft war appropriations, raise troops, all of it is gone. And fighting a war as a lame duck president would be an interesting experiment, especially a civil war. Bush had enough trouble doing that during his presidency, and that was a not as tricky of a war fight as what Lincoln was looking at. So it would have been a disaster.
Can I just-
if Lincoln lost that election?
Pete, you got anything to say here, Pete? I know you've been quiet for a minute, buddy. Pete? But I think I got Pete muted.
Here I go.
Pete?
I can't do it. There you go. So
There
yeah,
we go. I had you muted, Pete.
a win in Pennsylvania or Maryland in 62 or in 63 probably would have brought sympathy. I don't think direct involvement. You might be right about the naval on the Blue Water, helping them break the blockade. But I don't think they wanted a direct conflict with the United States, either one of them, especially France. Britain, maybe, if they saw it to their economic advantage. They already started shifting their cotton production or the cotton source to Egypt.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about 1862, but certainly after that. So they didn't need the cotton as much. And of course, tobacco and, sugar and indigo or whatever else, rice, those weren't as important as cotton. But anyway, I personally think that if he'd have won a battle in Pennsylvania in 62 or in 63, that is a definite possibility that they would have, Great Britain would have recognized the Confederacy.
I think
If
it
I
would have
can-
been better in
I was-
1862 because 1863 the Confederacy had a lot less to bargain for as opposed to 62.
Can I just- Oh, go ahead. Sorry. We need a traffic cop, a traffic light.
Yeah, hit the little button like this right here,
Okay.
and then like see there, Chris gets stopped now. All right, now whoever hits it first.
Mark, go ahead.
All I want to say is, I know we're kind of off on a rabbit's trail, but they are interrelated. But my quick question is, had England particularly gotten involved, let's just set France aside for a minute, but had England gotten involved and they sent ground troops, a significant number of ground troops, and they found out just how bloody this war was, and the body count starts going up and up, what would have happened domestically in England for that? In England to that? Remember, we're just a few years after the Crimean War,
Mhm.
and the public support in England was not crazy about that. So those memories are still fresh there, particularly in the lower classes that supplied the bulk of troops. Would England have had the stomach for a high body count if they'd gotten
No.
involved on the ground?
Y'all give y'all's
Can
opinion, and I
Can I jump in just with because I
Yeah,
think
you give
when it
yours
comes
and I'll
to-
go mine.
I think when it comes to Britain and France, it's important not to underestimate the bellicosity those nations felt at that point towards the Union. I hear what you're saying, Peter, but where I would disagree, or Pete, sorry, where I would disagree is France had Napoleon. Napoleon loved his schemes. Napoleon had a long game in mind for North America. Remember that at this point he has just failed his first attempt at invading Mexico, and he's
Mhm.
planning his second. And his goal is to essentially invade Mexico for the purpose of conquering it, and then he wants to use the Confederacy as a buffer state. So he has significant reason to want the Confederacy to succeed. He then hopes that by some magic, the Confederacy will sell him Louisiana. That part was kind of ridiculous, but he seemed to think it was possible. And the Confederacy would be smart to let him believe that. But what was holding back the French specifically was Britain. And Britain was actually seriously considering intervention. Parliament debated the American question quite significantly, Famously, Palmerston at last arose in the debate and stated that the question of intervention should be left to the cabinet and to the administration. Palmerston's administration had specialized in foreign policy, and Congress acceded to that. And in their cabinet meetings, essentially what the argument boils down to is Lee is invading Maryland. Let us wait a while and see how it goes. If the Confederates have the best of it, we'll come right away. If, however, the Federals give them a good drubbing, we'll hold on a while. So they really are considering actual direct intervention. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean bloody offensives. That might simply be what Mark's saying, which is to give the Confederacy what it desperately needed, naval support. This is why they want the Confederate armies to demonstrate that they can win the land battles. So this support might redound to breaking up the blockade, and then the French applying their forces to open up a corridor between the Confederacy and Mexico to allow for free trade between Franco-Mexico and the Confederacy. Meanwhile, the British opening the line of exchange of cotton, revitalizing the Confederate economy, and allowing the Confederacy to focus its entire forces on the land battles. Basically, what I'd say is they might not have to send a lot of troops. Now, as for Britain, they do have a reason beyond this to support the Confederacy. This is where we come in. Our soon-to-be Prime Minister, and at this point Premier of Canada West, a man by the name of Sir Johnny Macdonald, was convinced that if the Union lost the war, they would go to war with Canada in order to reclaim lost territory and to make up for the difference. This was an absurd proposition, but he really believed it, which is why Canada was rapidly militarizing at this point. And it is reasonable to believe that Britain would have heavily garrisoned and, if necessary, operated offensively against the United States if they continued to believe the U.S. was a national security threat towards their empire. So it's not at all infeasible that they would do so. But just the naval support alone. As for Egypt, yes, they were getting cotton from Egypt, but it was inferior and there wasn't enough. They really wanted that southern cotton. And by the end of the war, their mills were starving for it. So I think there's reason to believe they would get involved.
I agree with everything you said.
I'm sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Had won a major victory on that campaign in Maryland or Pennsylvania, would Great Britain and or France have directly, recognized the Confederacy, declared war on the United States, no matter what their involvement? Would they have done that, I guess, is the question.
I want to touch on something real quick. You talked about the casualties a while ago. I don't think that the casualties, I think the British people would have stomached casualties. You got to remember, I know it seems like long ago, but, they were suffering hundreds of thousands of casualties during the Napoleonic Wars. You compare Civil War battles to one Napoleonic battle, they're night and day what the losses were. So
True,
I don't think
there's one huge difference, though. The Napoleonic campaign was kind of like the Napoleonic campaign for the Brits was kind of like World War II. They knew their asses were on the line, and they were unified. In the Civil War, and looking at our Civil War, there was a division with the upper class supporting the South and the working class supporting the North. So they weren't all unified in how they viewed it internally.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I agree with that, Mark. I think it would. I think it would be something over proxy war. I don't think it would be the same level of commitment, and the pain threshold would be much, much, much lighter. But I think that's also why the British want the Confederacy to demonstrate they can win, quote, beyond peradventure of a doubt, which really redounds to, we don't want to have to commit that much. We'll help.
Let me just.
I think the pain threshold for the British is much, much smaller.
Bounce in one other thing, and I'll let Pete talk. You really wouldn't have to go as far as putting 80,000 boots on the ground. I mean, if you put 30,000 boots on the ground and demonstrated that you were going to take New York, Boston, what you would force the United States to divert troops to meet that threat, which would take some of the pressure off the Confederacy.
Yeah, even if they don't actually operate, just put them on the border.
Or even if they came across the border and they're just sitting there staring at you, you're going to force them to react.
Yep.
I would venture to say that if Great Britain, after a victory, a major, that campaign, I would say there's a pretty high probability they would have recognized the Confederacy. As far as the involvement, I'm not sure, but what it would have done was the peaceniks of the North would have said, "Hey, wait a minute." Lincoln would have been, he wouldn't known what to do, because he would, obviously, if you're at war with Great Britain, you're going to have to commit a lot of your naval forces to fight. Whether it's just breaking the blockade or, attacking your cities or whatever it is, right? In conjunction with Canada. I mean, let's face it. I think the game was up if he wins this campaign, a big battle. I really do. And same thing for the election. It would have swung the Congress even more to the Democrats. And I think Lincoln's time would have been for this war anyway.
I can't get the finger to work. I'm really trying, y'all. I'm technically challenged.
That's okay. Jump right in.
But let me say this. What about this? Let's just for grins and giggles say England decides to recognize and get involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would have happened if they said, okay, Lee can hold them in Virginia, we're going to focus, and we're going to send our Navy and our men and retake New Orleans, which, don't forget, is the second largest city in the U.S. at that time. That totally changes the dynamics, really, of the whole war.
I think that also more accurately reflects how Britain would have approached it. It would have been a naval war.
Well, and that's why I was thinking New Orleans, because they were so naval focused anyway,
If I say something, I still don't think that's going to help the Army in Northern Virginia in this battle, this continuously locked in battle. I don't know if that's going to help them by retaking New Orleans.
Well, it would help them insofar as any operations out west that strengthen the Confederate armies in the west strengthens the Confederate breadbasket. I think about 40 to 50% of the food raised by the Confederate armies in the west actually went to Northern Virginia. The Virginia Army never had enough forage and food to feed itself. Bragg actually complained about this quite frequently. That sometimes over half of his beef stock was going in the general direction of the east. So all these things logistically redound on each other. Helping the west helps the east. It doesn't necessarily mean you're actually giving troops directly there. But if you can ease pressure in the west, and if you can ease the movement of supplies out west, you're going to ease the movement of supplies to the east as well. And I can tell you, in 1863, Lee would have really appreciated that. His army was starving in the winter of 62 to 63.
And can I say one thing?
I would like to say, let me pop this right here before I forget, because I don't know if I forget. And then I'll say, we've often heard all the time, getting recognition from England, and I would be like, so what? You recognize me, unless you're sending boots on the ground and your Navy and food and supplies. You just saying, hey, I exist as a nation. That's not going to help me on the ground when I'm losing 10, 15, 20,000 men in a battle. You're going to have to commit forces.
But remember, the Lincoln policy was the declaration of war if you recognize the country. So recognizing the Confederacy is essentially, in point of fact, the declaration of war. I think Mark wanted to say something. But that's not what I meant. What I meant was, say England says, okay, I recognize you as a nation. That's not helping the Confederacy just because you recognize them. You're going to have to come in there with men to help them.
It does open the door, though, to more loans, British money, to buy more materiel. But earlier, just a second earlier, we were talking about the beef, the flow of cattle coming over from Texas. One thing that we tend to forget is we always think of cattle for food. That's leather. That's critically needed leather once they've been dressed.
Boots.
Those Civil War shoes, those Civil War roads just ate up shoes. Those guys, North and South alike, went through shoes like crazy, and boots. The demand for leather, and we're forget accoutrements and belts and cartridge boxes, right? Shoes alone, man, they're making shoes 24 hours a day, damn near.
Right.
Sorry, used a bad word.
No, you're fine.
No, Mark, that's a fantastic point. It all comes down to logistics in these conflicts.
That earlier, online, that the Vicksburg campaign and Port Hudson was very important for cutting off any supplies.
That's right. Because you got the Red River comes out just above Port Hudson, and the railroad is across the river from Vicksburg. So when that 1-2 punch and they're gone, that's it. The far western Confederacy's cut off.
I mean, I personally, I'm just throwing this out there. I personally think Chattanooga was more of a significant loss than Vicksburg. But regardless, yeah, it's extreme, both of them.
All right, so back to Antietam though.
Sorry.
Back to Antietam.
We're off topic. Sorry.
That's all right. That's how it goes.
All right, so is Antietam the biggest battle as far as strategic wise of the war?
Can I take a shot at that?
Absolutely.
And then I have to split in a second, I'm afraid, but I tend to parse these things out as for what purpose. Antietam. So in the case of Antietam, the Confederacy has a real opportunity to strike a blow that'll change the strategic situation of the war. The Union has the opportunity to stop that. So to me, I look at it as outcomes that allow one side to win versus prevent one side to win, if that makes sense. So Gettysburg is not the turning point of the war, but it could have been if the Confederates won it. I think Antietam's up there, but I think the challenge with the Civil War is you're beginning to experience an industrial war that is just too massive to be defined by singular battles. So I think that Antietam is perhaps the most important battle that affects the diplomatic front. There are others, but at no point did the Confederacy come that close to diplomatic recognition. So if we're concerned about Confederate strategy vis-a-vis victory via diplomatic support, then yes. But that's only one avenue. And winning at Antietam does not mean the Union will win the war. It just means they've prevented the Confederacy from one outlet to win it. The Confederacy can still win the war. And that's where it gets truly tricky to say what's the most important battle. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Great answer.
So just
don't forget, after the battle, Lincoln.
The strategic there, the strategic and the retreat of Bragg back into Chattanooga, those two together are very. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily call it the turning point, but I'd say it was the beginning of more of a defensive posture, I guess, for the Confederates.
I don't know. I see what you mean. And don't forget Earl Van Dorn, because it was a three-pronged defensive. But I think with the Confederates, I see what you're saying. I think the Confederates' problem strategically is they only ever thought on operational levels. So the tri-offensive of Earl Van Dorn and Sterling Price in Tennessee, of Bragg and Smith to Kentucky and Lee into Maryland, that was an accident. They never coordinated these campaigns. They just happened to come out around the same time. And I think the Confederacy in the East is still able to maintain the operational initiative into 63. In the West, the Confederates do reclaim it for a couple of months following Chickamauga. So I don't think it's the end of Confederate offensive capability. What I think is what it really loses is one of the best possible outcomes to Confederate offensive activity, which is recognition, which is still possible to gain. But I guess the way I see it is, I see what you're saying, but I think into 63, the Confederates could and still were demonstrably capable of retaking the operational offensive. And even in 64, they try it.
See, I've always said that they were in the war until the Wilderness.
That's an interesting. I mean, I go pretty far. I'm pretty extreme on it. I kind of agree with Alan Gelzo that the war is over at Appomattox. I might go to
but I think that after the Wilderness, Lee no longer had the ability of maneuver and offensive capabilities.
True, he changed his strategy, but prolonged attrition absolutely had the capacity to win that war, and it nearly worked. To me, I think really all the Confederacy has to do is survive until the United States gives up. And every election has the possibility of losing the ability to maintain the initiative. So for me, I think personally, after Third Petersburg, I find it very difficult to see how it could have been won. But General Grant himself said that he actually thought the war would last till 1866. And his greatest concern was that Lee would link up with Johnston and maintain the war for another year, resulting in another congressional election against an increasingly bloody war. So it's really in the air.
Somebody told me that I was crazy the other day because I said the Confederacy did not have to win the war. They just didn't have to lose it.
That's precisely correct.
No, you're absolutely right. All they had to do, they didn't have to defeat the North. They just had to hang on.
And he told me, he said, "No, you're wrong." I said, "No." I said that they did. That their only goal was not to lose. It wasn't to win.
That was one of the arguments after. That was one of the arguments after First Manassas. Remember when Davis hops on a train or engine actually and runs up there, and he's huddling with Beauregard and Johnson about what to do. And I can't
Jackson
remember. One of them is saying, "Hey, we're not trying to conquer them. We're just trying to, keep our own defense."
Jackson wanted to pursue.
Right, but what I'm saying though is, in that three-way meeting with Beauregard, Johnston, and Davis, just the three of them, I can't remember if it was Beauregard or Johnston was saying, "Hey, remember, we're just trying to defend. We're not trying to take over them."
That's right. And then they reversed their positions. Beauregard pretended to have wanted to attack the whole time. Woodworth, in his Lee and Davis at War, he summarizes it basically by saying there are effectively two choices: to roll the dice now at the chance of winning or at the possibility of catastrophic defeat, or to hold on with the possibility of a prolonged defeat, but a guarantee of a prolongation of life. And really, that's what it comes down to. So your attrition might work in the long run, or it might just extend your defeat. But do you want to risk an immediate defeat on a significant chance to win now, or do you want to gamble on eventual victory for guaranteed survival right now? And Davis favors survival, which could have won the war. I mean, really, I'm kind of fanatical on this. I really don't think in the Civil War, I don't think the final hand is down until the last month.
You're one of the few people who agree with me when I keep telling them, and as late as the summer of 1864, the South was still in this war, and they're like, "No, you're crazy. They were not." And I thought, yes, they were definitely in this war. I mean, you had Johnston had Sherman outside of Atlanta. Lee was bogged down there. Forrest was still raiding as far as Mississippi. I said they were in the fight as late as the summer of 1864.
As long as there's an avenue to victory, and in my opinion, and then I gotta stop talking because I'm talking too much. But in my opinion, the Confederacy has avenues to victory really all the way up to the fall of Petersburg. At that point, it's kind of tricky to see it. But there are still avenues to victory. They're smaller, they're increasingly small, but there are avenues to victory. Until those avenues to victory are absolutely cut off, you cannot say the war is definitively won. If that was the case, then the Americans lost the War of Independence when they lost New York.
Right. I'm sorry, guys. Y'all jump in. Y'all, we're talking. Give us some of y'all's thoughts.
Don't apologize. We're all very passionate about it, and we all get very excited.
Well, the war
I get talking too much.
War went on until Appomattox in North Carolina. I mean, it's a fact, right? So the question is, did they have the will to go on the offensive? I guess when I said defensive posture, I meant what was their will to do it, and I believe Lee had to do a lot of, convincing for that invasion in '63. Personally.
True. If I could respond, Pete, I Lee did have to convince them. I think Davis was open to it. But remember, in the West, Davis is the one who orders Bragg. I'm going to reinforce your army with the First Corps, and then you're going to attack. So he's actually the one telling Bragg. And he does this a lot. He actually, as late as 1865, he's ordering Beauregard, consolidate your forces in South Carolina and attack Sherman's supply lines. And the response from Beauregard is, Mr. President, he doesn't have supply lines. That's what makes this so brilliant. But they're still stuck on this idea of consolidate and counterattack. And the Confederates, they never got over that because Davis was obsessed with that as a strategy. But I don't think they ever lost the will to attack. Maybe they lose the capacity to carry an organized offensive. But in '64, even though General Hood's invasion of Tennessee was not really a success. He still has the logistical capacity to do it. He just kind of fumbles on the tackle. But he's
Oh, come on now. That I'm sorry, Chris, I got to interrupt, but that Hood Invasion 64 was a pipe dream from the get-go.
Well,
it was
not
not a great
really.
strategy.
No, at first I didn't think so either. But the more I've studied it, Hood got close so many times, and he had put so
He
much
really did.
fear. He had put so much fear in DC that a few days before Nashville or Franklin, Grant had actually told Lincoln he was going to take command of the Army of Tennessee against Hood.
Oh, he did more than that. He got on a train and he went to Washington. He was actually starting to go on the way to Nashville.
Yeah, that's right. He went to Washington to meet with Lincoln and tell him he was going to take command.
Yeah.
If I may,
He
Mark,
sent
if I can
Logan
try to
to-
square the circle. Oh, sorry, Pete.
I'm sorry. He did go to Washington. He sent Logan to relieve Thomas.
Mhm.
Very
Yeah.
good about that campaign.
If I can try to square the circle, what I mean, and I should mention, Mark, when it comes to Hood's overall plan, marching into Kentucky, raising 20,000 troops, going to Washington, I agree that was not feasible. But what I mean is, I think that what Hood did have logistically was a sufficient army to move the theater of war into Tennessee.
Okay.
With the
Yeah,
only
that
problem
I
being
agree.
left
Yeah, I
Sherman
agree.
behind in Georgia.
That I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
think
Hood, Hood, and I commented. William Satterwhite had an excellent post. Oh Lord, I'm getting old. I can't remember. It was I think last weekend, and there was some really good follow up about Hood. And I commented, and several other folks commented. Hood gets a bum rap because for being overly aggressive, and he failed. But he came so close over and over and over. You know what I mean? He looks reckless in hindsight, but at the time, it came extraordinarily close.
Look
Over
at
and over and over.
look at his plans. Look who they're based off of. Jackson. I mean, he watched Jackson and Lee. I mean, he was so close so many times. And I think that's all I'd like to say in Hood's defense. He was put in an impossible situation. There's nobody that could have succeeded outnumbered 3-1 and want him to go on the attack with the enemies at the gate. I mean, Hood was just put in a situation nobody could win in.
Plus, he knew he got the job because the guy before him hadn't attacked. He knew that was expected of him.
Right.
Just maybe not uphill against a fortified enemy of greater strength.
But Chris, you said something. Chris, you said something a minute ago. I want to quibble with. How about that? I don't want to quibble with. You said after the Wilderness, Lee lost the ability to maneuver, and I think you're 90% right, because when he had to cover Richmond and Petersburg, there was only so much he could do, right? But don't forget, he still sent Early into Pennsylvania and Maryland. And remember Henry Kidd Douglas's famous story? Well, you're sure scared the hell out of Abe Lincoln.
Yeah, I mean that's true. But he also sent a corps. And I should have clarified. When I meant maneuver, I meant putting his whole army like in the during the Second Manassas campaign.
Just add that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he sent Breckinridge into West Virginia with some success as well, if I recall, to drive Sagalow. Or was Breckinridge already there? I might keep confusing myself.
Breckinridge, Lee had. I didn't know Breckinridge was under Lee's command.
He was following the Battle of Newmarket. I just can't remember if.
Yes, you're right.
Or if he was already stationed in West Virginia. But yeah.
Yeah. It was.
But yeah, no, he's still. And I mean, you could even make the case that Spotsylvania, well, it's defensive. Lee is picking the battlefield. Lee is still moving faster than Grant. Grant doesn't want to fight at Spotsylvania. Lee might be reacting, but he is still dictating where the battle takes place. After Spotsylvania, well, so much for that.
Yeah, I mean, he had an innate ability to outguess where his opponent was going.
Right until Grant stole the march on him.
Yeah, right until he stole the march on him.
Well, don't forget, he's an engineer, and he thinks logically like an engineer. I mean, his mind was like a calculator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Spotsylvania was a logical place to go based on the direction of the Orange Turnpike. that is a good position.
Oh, that was a great position. Yeah, I mean, because it controlled so much right there. I mean, it's Spotsylvania. I mean, I give a lot of credit for that, but yeah, that was an easy guess. He knew where he was going through there. I mean, so yeah, I mean, this has been fun. I plan on start. Let's see, tonight's Wednesday. I'm gonna try to start having these again every Wednesday night. Any suggestions for next week?
I love it all.
We'll
Anything
let
you want to do, I want to
we'll
be.
we'll let our Canadian friend that we that's our honorary Confederate that oh, that reminds me, I forgot to tell you this. I'm not going to tell you his name, but I have a moderator who is from Canada, and he kept making I kept picking up on terms he was saying. And one day he said second Manassas. So I messaged him and I said, all right, I said, so what's the deal, man? Why are you a Confederate sympathizer? And he said, I'm not a Confederate sympathizer. I said, bruh, I said, you called it second Manassas. I said, I said, you called it Sharpsburg. I said, okay. I said, Northerners don't call it that. I said, why are you a Confederate sympathizer? And then he started telling me a little bit about it. I said, okay, all right. I said, at least admit it. I said, but come on,
Hey, Chris,
you don't.
one last thing can I just say one last thing on Antietam before we depart?
Sure, buddy.
Have any of y'all ever read the wonderful novel Lone Star Preacher or Texas Rebel was the original title, I think?
I've not.
It's a novel, but it's very, very meticulously correct. And there's some other sources I've read about this, but they tell the story that the night after the battle, the night of the battle, Lee gave the order no campfires because they were, you could tell where the enemy's line was and you could position your troops during the night and attack in the morning. So there were no campfires. And the guy in the 5th Texas, and supposedly it's based on a true story, guy in the 5th Texas Infantry is on patrol, is on picket duty, and he sees a little flicker of light in a bush, and he goes behind and looks behind the bush, and there's 4 or 5 of Wheat's Louisiana Tiger Zouaves sitting around. There's a dead Union sergeant. His eyes and mouth are open. They've stuck a little candle stub in his mouth, and they're using his chest as a table, and they're playing cards.
Oh God!
And when he got back to camp the next morning, he was telling the boys about it, and they said, they all asked him, they said, what'd you do? And he goes, what do you think I did? I got the heck out of there. He left him alone.
Good Lord. Although I would say one thing that I hate to, I'm being that guy, and I apologize. It would have had to have been Hayes Tigers because Wheat's Tigers were destroyed at Gaines's Mills. So
that's right,
a lot of Louisiana troops called themselves Tigers. So
well,
they were Wheat.
I got a letter in my collection where a Union soldier refers to the Mississippi Tigers.
Yeah. One of my funny ones, I remember I was reading a memoir of a fellow in the 5th New Jersey, and he says that they fought the Tigers, and the Tigers actually hid their flag so that they would not, the Union troops wouldn't know they were Confederates, and then fired at them. And I thought that was probably disgusting behavior. So I messaged a friend of mine who's an expert on the Tigers. This was, I forget, I think it was the Battle of, I think it was Williamsburg. Yeah, it was Williamsburg. And I asked him about this, and he responded, yeah, the Tigers weren't at Williamsburg. And what happened is in the early war, especially Union regiments have this wonderful habit of always assuming it's the Louisiana Tigers because they were so famous. But the Tigers weren't even on the battlefield.
These funny stories. I've got to tell this. This is one of the best ones I ever read. It was a skirmish. The Union soldiers, they're firing at each other, and a Yank and a Reb, they jump in a foxhole to get away from the firing, and they break out into a fist fight, and it turns into a toe-to-toe fight, and they're out of the foxhole, and they're just wailing at each other, just toe-to-toe, and both sides stop shooting and start watching the fight.
Was that where was it? Wilderness or where was that? I've heard about it.
I don't remember where it was at, but they stopped shooting and they started watching the fight.
When I've heard that story, it's South Mountain, but I don't know if that's A, true, or B, which part of South Mountain. But when I heard that story, it was South Mountain, if that helps.
Can I just one last one? Y'all got me on this road. I'm sorry. It's not Antietam related, but I just came to mind. I just love it.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Munfordville, Kentucky. We talked earlier about 62, where Bragg's barreling into Kentucky, remember? And Louisville is the race. Louisville's the supply depot, and whoever can get to Louisville first, they get this huge weapons cache, right? And Munfordville has, it crosses the, I believe it's the Green River, and there was a fort, a little fort there by the railroad. And was it Colonel Wilder from Indiana? And I can't remember the unit.
Yes, I love this story. Sorry.
No, was he John or Richard? Chris, you remember? I can't remember his first name. He was a music teacher.
I think it was John.
I think it was John too. He was a music teacher by profession, but he wasn't militarily trained, and so he gets this command of this little fort, right? And so as they're going north, General Chalmers from Mississippi thinks, boy, wouldn't this be a real feather in my cap and Bragg's eyes if I capture this fort? So without orders, he swings over, attacks the fort, and the Confederates are repulsed with casualties, right? So Chalmers now tries to bluff Wilder, and he sends him this beautifully Victorian worded letter saying, congratulates you on your noble resistance, but continued fighting is hopeless. If I urge you to surrender now to avoid further needless effusion of blood. And Wilder writes back, short and to the point, thank you for your compliments. If you wish to avoid further needless effusion of blood, stay out of the range of my guns. Well, now Chalmers realizes, oh heck, so I got to tell Bragg. Well, you can imagine, Bragg was always in a sour mood on his good days, right? Bragg overreacts and brings darn near the entire Army of Tennessee to Munfordville, surrounds this little fort, and sends a terse note saying, hey, we're here, we're going to attack. You want to surrender or what? Well, now I'm sorry, I'm taking so long. Let me wrap this up. But Wilder, remember, he's a music teacher, and he doesn't know what to do, but Munfordville was the hometown of Simon Bolivar Buckner, the Confederate general, and he'd heard, the locals talk about him. So he sends a flag of truce out to meet with Butler between the line and Buckner. And Butler's like, what the heck's the guy? Why does he want to meet with me? So they meet between the lines, and Wilder says, look, here, everybody in town says you're a great guy and you're a professional soldier and you went to West Point. So here's the deal. If I'm being bluffed, I'm going to look like a fool if I surrender. But, if Bragg is here, I'm going to get a bunch of guys killed. So you're a professional. Tell me what to do. Should I surrender or should I fight? And Buckner's like, no. And Wilder's like, no, really, I trust you. You tell me what to do. Do I surrender or do I fight? And Buckner's like, that's not the way it works. And Wilder a third time says, please just tell me what to do. And Buckner says, okay, I'll tell you what I will do. I'll escort you with a flag of truce along our lines, and you can count the number of cannons pointed at your fort. And about the time they counted 25 or 30 cannons, Wilder said, yeah, probably a good idea to surrender. So he does surrender, but because of that, Rosecrans makes it back to, not Rosecrans, Rosecrans makes it to Louisville, so Louisville's safe.
Hey, let me tell you one thing that I like Chris Coe. I know he's got a Dan Corn told me this. He's a great history teacher. He said, I forgot what base it was at. He said, but Bragg was at this base, and he said he was the regimental commander. He said not only was he the regimental commander, he was also the quartermaster officer. Not only was he the quartermaster officer, he was the executive officer to the company commander. And that just shows you how it was back then. He said, so he needed supplies. So as the regimental officer, he wrote the quartermaster officer, who was himself, for supplies. And he turned himself down. So then he went up to the executive officer, which was himself, and had the executive officer write the quartermaster officer a letter requesting supplies. The quartermaster officer, who was Bragg, turned himself down. So the commanding officer, he was gone. So as the acting officer, he wrote the quartermaster officer again, which was himself, for supplies, and he turned him down. When the commander got back, he said, Bragg, you're the only person I know who could be turned down by his own self.
Well, sorry, Jess, it's gotten late. I have to get going. I'll save some funny stories for next time.
Hey, Chris, yeah, let's start. We're going to start this on Wednesday night, man. Thanks for coming on. I love having you guys, and we'll try to get some more next week. And thanks a lot, guys, for coming on to this right here.
Thank you.
See you later.
All right, guys, y'all take care.